Welcome back to Earthly Delights, my dear gardening friends. If you love the smell of healthy soil, if you have ever saved kitchen scraps for compost, planted seedlings on a sunny windowsill, or dreamed of turning a small backyard into something more abundant, this episode is for you. Let me ask you something that may change the way you look at your garden forever. Have you ever planted something that will live longer than you? Every spring, many of us rush to plant tomatoes, cucumbers, herbs, beans, and corn. We prepare the beds, water every morning, pull weeds, fight pests, and wait patiently for the harvest. And then when autumn comes, the cycle ends. Next year, we begin again. That kind of gardening is beautiful, but it also demands constant labor. We are trading our time, energy, water, compost, and soil fertility for food that lasts only one season. But nature offers another path. What if one tree planted today could feed your children, your grandchildren, and even people in your family 300 years from now? This is not fantasy. Around the world, ancient food forests have fed families and communities for generations. Some have survived drought, heat, poor soil, and changing times because they were built around deep roots, strong trees, and patient hands. That is the kind of wealth we rarely talk about. Not just money, but living wealth. A tree that gives fruit, nuts, shade, mulch, habitat, and food year after year is more than a plant. It is a legacy. So today we are shifting our mindset from short-term gardeners to long-term growers. I'm going to share 10 powerful trees you can plant once and potentially harvest from for decades, even centuries. These trees are resilient, productive, and surprisingly low maintenance once established. And make sure you stay with me until tree number 9, because that one did more than feed families. It helped build civilizations. Before we begin, if you love practical gardening wisdom, food forests, healthy soil, and growing abundance at home, please subscribe to Earthly Delights. Now, let's start planting for generations. 1. Mulberry, the grocery-proof superfood. We begin with one of the most generous trees you could ever invite into a backyard food forest, the mulberry. And here's the funny thing. Fresh mulberries are almost impossible to find in most grocery stores. Not because they are rare, and not because they are difficult to grow, but because the fruit is so soft, juicy, and delicate that it can bruise before it ever reaches the shelf. That is exactly what makes it so valuable for the home gardener. While supermarkets are filled with fruit bred for shipping, firmness, and appearance, your own mulberry tree can give you something far better. Sweet, dark, nutrient-rich berries picked at the perfect moment. A mature mulberry tree can produce around 50 to 80 pounds of fruit in a single summer. And unlike many fruit trees that test your patience for years, mulberries often begin producing in just 3 to 5 years. That is a fast reward for anyone building long-term food security. For generations, mulberries served as a bridge crop, offering fresh food in late spring when stored winter supplies were running low and summer harvests had not fully arrived. They are also forgiving trees. They tolerate poor soil, handle drought, and usually need very little pruning or spraying once established. You plant it, you let it grow, and year after year it gives back. That is the kind of abundance no annual vegetable bed can match. 2. Hazelnut, the shelf-stable powerhouse. From juicy berries, we now move into something every serious food garden needs: calories that can be stored. This is where the hazelnut becomes a quiet powerhouse. Most fruit trees give you sweetness, water, and vitamins, which are wonderful. But when you are thinking about feeding a family through difficult seasons, you also need fat, protein, and dense energy. Hazelnuts deliver exactly that. A single pound of hazelnuts can contain around 2,800 calories, making them one of the most valuable foods you can grow in a small space. A mature hazelnut can produce about 30 pounds of nuts in a good year. That means one tree can place more than 80,000 calories into your family's food supply, right from your own land. And the best part is not only the harvest, it is the storage. Hazelnuts, kept in their shells, can remain shelf-stable for over a year without refrigeration. No freezer, no canning, no complicated preserving, just a cool, dry place and a little patience. In Europe, during seasons when grain harvests failed, hazelnuts helped provide the fats and energy people needed to survive cold winters. For gardeners today, planting 2 compatible varieties for cross-pollination is more than a gardening choice. It is like weaving a living safety net into the soil around your home. 3. Fig, the ancient symbol of abundance. Now let's turn toward a tree that has followed humanity through history like an old friend, the fig tree. There is a reason figs appear again and again in ancient stories, gardens, and sacred texts. They are a symbol of peace, prosperity, and abundance because they are incredibly productive and surprisingly tough. A mature fig tree can produce 100 to 200 pounds of fruit in a single year, and it does not need perfect conditions to do it. Figs can thrive in rocky soil, intense heat, and dry corners where many other fruit trees would struggle. But the real power of the fig is what happens after harvest. Fresh figs are sweet and luxurious, but dried figs become one of nature's original survival foods. At around 1,200 calories per pound, dried figs can last for over a year when stored properly, giving you energy long after the fresh fruit season has passed. And if you feel like you're starting late with your garden, figs are one of the most encouraging trees you can plant. Many can begin fruiting in just 2 to 3 years. That means a neglected, sunny corner of your yard could become a living pantry faster than you might expect. A fig tree does not just produce fruit. It teaches patience, resilience, and the beauty of turning difficult ground into sweetness. 4. Apple, the northern survival staple. Of course, we cannot talk about feeding a family without honoring one of the most familiar and dependable trees in the world, the apple tree. Apples are so common today that we sometimes forget how powerful they really are as a home food system. A mature apple tree can yield 200 to 400 pounds of fruit each year. That is not a snack. That is boxes, baskets, sauces, dried slices, cider, and winter food security hanging from one tree. Before modern grocery stores made fresh fruit available all year, apples were one of the most important sources of nutrition through the cold months. Certain varieties can be stored in a cool, dark root cellar for 3 to 6 months. Slice and dry them, and they can last even longer. Ferment them into cider, and you create another form of preservation that our ancestors depended on for generations. Apples do ask for more planting than some trees. Many varieties need a compatible partner nearby for cross-pollination, and good soil preparation makes a real difference. But once established, a well-chosen apple tree can feed a family for 50 to 80 years. And anyone who has ever bitten into an apple grown in their own yard knows the feeling. It is not just sweet. It tastes like patience, care, and victory. 5. Persimmon, the candy tree of survival. As the season turns colder and much of the garden begins to rest, our 5th tree steps into the spotlight. Meet the persimmon, often called the fruit of the gods, and for good reason. When many other trees have already dropped their leaves and the vegetable beds are empty, persimmons can still be hanging there like bright orange lanterns. In some climates, the fruit remains on the branches even after the first frost, becoming softer, sweeter, and richer with time. A mature persimmon tree can produce 150 to 300 pounds of fruit in a year. That is a remarkable harvest, especially when you consider how little maintenance many persimmon trees require once they are established. But here is what makes persimmon so valuable for long-term food security. It dries beautifully. When dried, persimmons can develop a natural white sugary coating, almost like a powdered glaze. The texture becomes chewy and rich, similar to a date, and the fruit can last for more than a year without chemical preservatives. Native to parts of North America and Asia, persimmons are hardy, pest-resistant, and deeply dependable. They ask for patience, but they reward you at exactly the moment when the garden feels quiet and empty. That is what makes persimmon special. It is not just a fruit tree. It is a burst of sweetness waiting for your family when the rest of the season has gone silent. 6. Chestnut, the bread that grows on branches. Now we are halfway through, and this is where we move from simple fruit trees into the true heavy lifters of a long-term food forest. Have you ever wished you could grow something as filling as wheat, corn, or potatoes without plowing the ground every single year? That is where the chestnut tree becomes extraordinary. For centuries across Europe and Asia, chestnut was known as the bread tree, and that name was not poetic exaggeration. Unlike many nuts that are mostly rich in oils and fats, chestnuts are packed with complex carbohydrates. In a practical sense, they are like potatoes growing inside a shell, hanging from a branch above your head. A healthy chestnut grove can produce food for generations, even centuries, once properly established. You can roast chestnuts over a fire, boil them into hearty meals, or dry and grind them into a naturally gluten-free flour that can be stored for months. In mountain regions, when grain fields in the valleys failed, chestnut forests often became the difference between hunger and survival. For a gardener thinking beyond one season, this tree changes everything. By choosing blight-resistant chestnut varieties and giving them good soil, sunlight, and space, you are not just planting a nut tree. You are growing bread on branches for people who may carry your family name long after you are gone. 7. Carob, the drought-proof chocolate. And now let's travel into hotter, drier country, where many fruit trees struggle and the soil can be rocky, thirsty, and unforgiving. What if there were a tree that could survive scorching drought and still reward you with hundreds of pounds of pods that taste almost like chocolate? That tree is carob. Native to the Mediterranean, carob is one of those trees that proves abundance does not always need perfect conditions. In places where heat, poor soil, and limited rainfall make gardening difficult, the carob tree can still thrive. A mature tree can produce 200 to 400 pounds of pods each year, and those pods have a naturally sweet, cocoa-like flavor that makes them useful in drinks, powders, baking, and emergency food storage. But the real superpower of carob is shelf life. Carob pods are naturally low in moisture and can contain around 50% natural sugar. That means you can harvest them, dry them well, keep them in a safe, dry place, and they may store for 2 to 3 years with almost no processing. Historically, carob pods were valuable during shortages, sieges, and hard seasons because they were light, sweet, filling, and dependable. If you live in a warm, dry climate, this is not just a tree. It is a living insurance policy against heat, drought, and empty shelves. 8. Walnut, the black gold of the homestead. As we move into the final 3, we step into the world of true multi-generational wealth. The walnut tree is not only a food producer, it is one of the most powerful dual-purpose trees a homestead can plant. First, walnuts provide something that can be difficult to grow in many home gardens: dense calories, healthy fats, and valuable nutrients like omega-3s. A mature walnut tree can produce 50 to 80 pounds of nuts in a good year, which may translate into roughly 150,000 to 240,000 calories from one tree alone. That is not just a harvest, that is stored energy, grown from sunlight, rain, soil, and time. Nature also packaged walnuts beautifully. Their hard shells act like little vaults, helping protect the nut inside and allowing it to stay fresh for over a year when stored properly. But walnut has another hidden value. High-quality, black walnut timber can become extremely valuable once the tree matures, sometimes worth thousands of dollars depending on size, quality, and market conditions. And because walnut trees can live 150 to 250 years, they become more than a backyard planting. They become a biological bank account, giving annual dividends in food and a possible timber inheritance for future generations. 9. Oak, the civilization builder. Now we come to the king of the forest, the oak tree. Today, many people see oaks mostly as shade trees, wildlife trees, or the source of leaves they have to rake in autumn. But for thousands of years, oak trees were much more than that. They were one of the great calorie sources of human civilization. A single mature oak can drop 500 to 1,000 pounds of acorns in a good year. Those acorns are not waste. They are dense with carbohydrates and fats, and for many ancestral communities, they were a major food source. The challenge, of course, is tannins. Raw acorns can be bitter, but our ancestors learned a simple and brilliant method: leaching them with water until the bitterness washed away. Once prepared, acorns could be dried, ground into flour, and used for breads, porridges, and other filling foods. It was slow food, patient food, and survival food. The oak is also one of the ultimate plant and forget trees. Once established, it can handle drought, storms, poor seasons, and time itself. Many oaks can live 300 to 600 years. So when you plant an oak, you are not just adding shade to a yard, you are establishing a permanent food factory, a wildlife sanctuary, and a living monument that may outlast entire nations. 10. Pecan, the ultimate calorie king. Finally, we arrive at the 10th legacy tree, the pecan. And what a tree to finish with. The pecan is far more than a beautiful giant for the landscape. It is a massive calorie factory that can stand in one place and feed generations. A mature pecan tree can produce 200 to 400 pounds of nuts each year under good conditions. Those nuts are rich in fats, protein, and energy, making them one of the most valuable foods for long-term resilience. In times of shortage, foods like pecans matter because they are compact, filling, and powerful. Their thick shells also give them a major advantage. Properly stored, pecans can remain nutrient-dense for up to 2 years without modern refrigeration. That means the harvest does not have to be eaten immediately. It can become part of a family pantry, a winter food supply, or a backup when other crops fail. Indigenous peoples valued pecans as a lightweight, high-energy food that could be gathered, carried, stored, and traded. For the modern gardener, the lesson is simple. Some of the strongest food security comes from trees that take patience. Pecans need time to establish, but once they mature, they can live and produce for 200 to 300 years. They are the crowning jewel of a resilient food forest, offering beauty, shade, nutrition, and abundance long after the first planter is gone. 11. The awakening and call to action. Look around at the world we live in today. So much of our modern food system depends on long supply chains, rising fuel costs, changing weather, and prices that seem to climb higher every year. But when you plant trees like these, you begin to step out of that fragile cycle. You stop thinking only like a consumer, and you begin thinking like a producer. That is the real power of a food forest. It gives you layers of security. Annual vegetables can feed you this season. Berries can feed you in a few short years. But trees can feed your family for decades, even centuries. There is an old saying, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. And that is more than a nice quote. It is a reminder that every strong garden begins with one decision. One hole in the soil, one seedling placed with care. Now imagine the year 2150. Your great-great-grandchildren walk into the yard. They pick figs from a tree you planted. They gather walnuts, chestnuts, pecans, or acorns from branches that began with your hands. They may never know every struggle you faced, but they will know this. Someone loved them enough to plant for a future they would never personally see. And you do not need a huge farm to begin. 1 or 2 well-chosen legacy trees can change the future of a family garden. So, Earthly Delights family, which of these 10 trees would you plant first? Share your answer in the comments below. And if this video helped you see gardening in a deeper way, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who dreams of growing real abundance. Let's stop planting only for one season and start planting for generations. Until next time, keep digging, keep dreaming, and keep growing. See you in the garden.